Just imagine for a moment that you're a castaway, marooned on a beautiful tropical island. Well, if you're having a particularly stressful day, that might not be a bad idea. But what's the first image that comes to your mind? I bet it's that iconic palm tree in the sand, straight out of the movies and TV shows and cartoons. But now let's just say you really were washed up on shore and you decided to take shade under that palm tree. Well, what would be the first thing that would strike you? Coconut? Yeah, coconut. Seems that nature designed the coconut palm for the hardy survivor. I mean, the first thing is that the wood of the coconut tree and those big palm fronds could be used to make your perfect beach hut. Of course, the leaves could be woven into baskets so that you could collect coconuts because they're going to give you water and milk and wine. You might enjoy a little wine there in paradise. The shell of the coconut is the perfect vessel for your libation, and you could also make this into some oil and vinegar. A salad might come in handy. The coconut husk could be made into coir, which you could use then to form a beautiful styling little rug for your beach hut. The shell of the coconut makes perfect fire fuel and actually gives off an insect repellent at the same time. But the really wonderful thing about coconut is that it's filled with completely sterile water. It does the same thing in your body that saline glucose does. It's the prescription for severe dehydration, which you might experience too if you're not used to the balmy climes of paradise. They're also buoyant little things, so you could lash a bunch of them together to make a raft should you decide you want to get off the island. But, you know, when I'm here on the beach in Mexico, I'm not in any hurry to leave. Now, Mexico isn't an island, of course, but it does have its roots firmly into the tropics. Look, there's all these varieties of palm trees around me. So it shouldn't come as any surprise to you that Mexico is one of the leading producers of coconuts. But if you're in the coconut business here in Mexico, well, you're probably not thinking about dessert, or even food for that matter. I mean, from coir rugs to souvenir mugs to palm hats, most of what the coconut produces just simply isn't for eating. And the coconuts that do go into food, well, they're usually lined up waiting to have the oil squeezed out of them. Seems like you could just make 1,000 different things out of coconut oil. But you say coconut to most Americans and they get the image of that bright white dessert garnish that you can find in the baking aisle of practically any grocery store. But that shredded coconut meat, well, it really only plays a small role in the whole coconut picture. Pie de coco is a specialty of the Yucatan. I first had it down in Mérida. That's the capital city of Yucatan, where it was basically just fresh coconut stuck together with a little sweetened condensed milk and a couple of eggs. Well, I got the recipe and I started making it, and I began to realize that they hadn't used any of this. Any of that liquid. You hear that liquid shaking around in there? Well, I decided to kind of revise the recipe and make my own sweetened condensed milk using that delicious liquid that's inside the coconut. But how do you get it out? Well, that's my ticket. Let me show you what I mean here. You poke at a couple of these little eyes here, finding which two of them are the absolute softest, and then you put in your corkscrew, wedging it in like that, and when you get the little thing started, you just keep going. Keep twisting it in all the way until you get to the very, very bottom. Then the top part of the corkscrew will just bore its way right through, giving you an open hole there. And then when you've got two clear holes, you're ready to dump out that liquid. And I'm gonna pour it directly into a saucepan through a strainer because it's gonna have a lot of little bits that'll come off the outside shell of the coconut. So we wanna collect those in the strainer. Once all of the liquid is out, I'm going to put the coconut into a 325-degree oven for about 15 minutes. This loosens the flesh from that hard outer hull, and now we're on to making our sweetened condensed milk out of this coconut liquid. I'm going to put into the liquid about 2/3 of a cup of sugar and a cupful of heavy cream. Put it over a medium heat, and we'll let it cook there, stirring it pretty frequently for about 15 minutes or so till it's reduced to 1 cup. Now, see those cracks there? That's the stress that in the heat of the oven will occur between the inside soft and the outside hard hull. Now, take an old towel or maybe one of your kids' old t-shirts and wrap that over the coconut, and then use a hammer to break it into big pieces. See that? I'm going to use I think I'll try a small knife, or you could use a screwdriver to wedge the flesh free from the shell. It'll come out like that. You want to do this while it's still warm, and then use your knife or a vegetable peeler to peel off all of that coconut skin. Rinse the pieces, and then we're on to shredding. Now I'm going to take this freshly grated coconut and put it in with 3 egg yolks. I'm going to put most of it in there, leaving behind just a little bit. We want about 3 cups of fresh grated coconut. I'll leave behind a little bit so that I can toast it and use it as a garnish. And to that, I'm going to add the homemade sweetened condensed milk. Look how beautiful that is. Not quite as sticky looking as the store-bought kind, but with way more flavor. A teaspoon of good Mexican vanilla, and for added flavor and textural contrast, some slivered almonds that have been toasted very lightly. You can see that beautiful brown color. Then mix all of that together and pack it into a crumb crust. Now you've got a lot of different options here. You could use a crumb crust that's made out of cookie crumbs, or perhaps one made out of bread crumbs like I like. Or you could just use a regular old graham cracker crust where your crumbs are all put together with a little melted butter and sugar and packed into a tin. Now this is a special kind of pie tin that they use in the Yucatan, very similar to the ones they use in Europe. About 9 inches across and about 3/4 of an inch deep with straight up and down sides. All of that goes into the crust. Smooth that out. And then you can see it's a little bit like a macaroon here, packed into a pie crust, and put that into 350-degree oven for 30 to 35 minutes until everything is browned on top and that custard is set. Now, for greatest ease in cutting, it's best to let this pie cool off completely. Even put it in the refrigerator for a little while for it to firm up completely. Then cut it, then rewarm it, because it's so delicious when it's warm. You could eat it just like that, but you know, I'm really partial to a spoonful of Mexican thick cream or creme fraiche. A little dollop of crushed raspberries on top of that, with a little sprinkling of toasted coconut. Some might call that gilding the lily. I say it's just letting the coconut strut. When my wife Deanne and I first moved to Mexico City, we lived in a budget hotel, very much like this, in a little room that was right above the hotel's cafeteria, its coffee shop. And that's where I made this great discovery, that people here in Mexico love pie. Now, that might not come as a great revelation to most folks, but you have to understand that I'm a serious patron of the pastry arts. Why, I always save room for pie. I go out of my way for pie. I'm a pie guy. So in that little room, I discovered that if I wanted a slice of all-American apple pie right here in Mexico City, all I had to do was go downstairs. And it wasn't just me. I mean, it seemed like that cafeteria was the hangout for a lot of the locals, for office workers and people that lived in the neighborhood. And they didn't just eat apple pie. I remember a really good pecan pie and a lime meringue pie. People seem to trail in and out all day long looking for their pie and coffee. So just get this image. Now, it's a number of years later, and I'm opening Frontera Grill in Chicago, and being the devoted pie guy, I want to put a pie on our dessert menu. And thinking back to those early years in Mexico City, I realized I don't have to make any excuses. I mean, pie and Mexico go very well together. So now the question, what do you put in a pie to give it a really authentic Mexican flavor? Gracias. You could use that other miraculous pod that you find in the Mexican tropics, the one that produces the cacao bean, that substance that the Aztecs called literally the food of the gods. In other words, you could use chocolate. And to that, you could add nuez, the most popular nut in Mexico, and nuez just literally means nut because it's understood around here that if you haven't specified something else, then the nut you mean is the pecan. And to sweeten things up, you could use piloncillos, and you could put those three things together in a pie and come up with what I did. Pie de chocolate y nuez estilo Frontera Grill. Pre-baked. Now that means that you've rolled out your pie crust and then fitted it into the pie pan, lined it with oiled foil, fill it all the way up to the top with beans, and then bake it until the crust is completely set. When it's set, take out the foil and the beans and return the crust to the oven for it to just dry out. That's the stage that it's at right now. And to make absolutely sure that the crust doesn't get soggy, I'm going to brush it lightly with a little bit of egg yolk. And it's onto the nuts. I have some cooled, toasted pecans. Just by halves, you can be sure of their quality when you can look at them. Put them into a bowl and then crush them with the back of a small bowl or a measuring cup. I don't want the consistency of already chopped pecans here. I want it to have some rough texture. When those are pretty well crushed, then add some chopped chocolate. You want a wonderful semi-sweet chocolate. The better the chocolate, the better the pie. And I'm going to add about 3 tablespoons of flour to that to help it stay suspended in the pie as it cooks. And we're ready to go on to the filling. Into the mixer bowl, I'm going to put a stick and a half of room temperature butter and brown sugar, 1 cup. Now we got to talk about that brown sugar because that's not really something that you can find in Mexico. When you're talking about brown sugar in Mexico, it's piloncillo, what I just pulled out of this rustic wooden mold. They would just boil down cane juice until it got to the right stage, pour it into these molds, and that's what they would use for sugar. You can still find it in the Mexican groceries like this. But it's not exactly the same as our brown sugar. This has got much more of a molasses-like flavor to it. It's also a lot harder to use in a lot of ways. It's tricky to get into this pie, so I suggest the first few times you make a pie like this, well, use the brown sugar. Put it into the mixer with the butter and beat it for about a minute until it's very well combined. Into the beaten butter and sugar go 5 eggs. While those are beating in there, I'm going to pour some molasses into corn syrup. 3/4 of a cup of corn syrup, 1/4 of a cup of molasses. That'll put back that little flavoring that we'll be missing by not using the unrefined sugar of Mexico, the piloncillo. And that just goes right into the batter. Now, 3 final flavorings. I have a half teaspoon of salt, about 2 teaspoons of great Mexican vanilla, and a generous tablespoon of Kahlua. That's all there is to it. Scrape that down right in over the pecan mixture. Stir it all up, and then pour it right into the pie crust. Should fill it just right about to the top. Just perfect. Now that's gonna go into a 350 degree oven, and it'll bake for about 1 hour. A dollop of barely sweetened whipped cream, a little sprinkling of crushed Mexican chocolate. There's only one thing we're missing. From the tropics of southern Mexico, the perfect accompaniment to chocolate pecan pie. Coffee, of course. You see, these high-grade Arabica coffee plants grow abundantly through the lush and moist mountains of southern and coastal Mexico, through the states of Veracruz and Oaxaca and Chiapas and down by the Guatemalan border. But how they got here is not exactly an act of nature. You see, our story starts with this great little piece about Pope Clement VII. Now, he's reportedly offered a taste of that infamous Muslim beverage, and by some priests who, of course, want him to ban it. But the Pope flips for coffee. He says that Satan's beverage is far too delicious to just waste on the infidels, so he baptizes it. He christens it as a Christian beverage. Well, now, how coffee gets here to the New World is not exactly a story of Christian charity. You see, the European lovers of that exotic beverage, most of them were aristocrats. Why, they just stooped to all kinds of subterfuge to try to build their coffee monopolies. In fact, the first plant to come here was a stolen plant, they say. It came around 1700. Well, by 1800, monster coffee harvests in Brazil have turned coffee from an elite beverage into something that's everyday for everybody. And this is serious coffee. Café con leche, foamy espresso topped with steaming milk. To tell you the truth, the everyday people in Mexico didn't really take to coffee very quickly. I mean, they had their own very rich and satisfying beverage, something they'd revered for years, hot chocolate. Well, except in places like La Parroquia here in Veracruz, most people in the United States would say that in Mexico they just don't take coffee quite so seriously. Well, of course, there have been espresso machines dotting all over Mexico for a long time. People drink coffee in the morning and drink it in the night. To tell you the truth, the coffee of choice for lots of people is Nescafe. Now, I know it's going to be hard for a lot of coffee aficionados to accept that. Same goes with spicing coffee, but here in Mexico, folks aren't afraid to make a sweet, spicy brew, flavor it with cinnamon and anise, maybe some orange peel, and sweeten it with piloncillo, that unrefined sugar that comes in cones. That's called café de olla. So here's my recommendation. If you're traveling to Mexico and you want, a regular cup of coffee, my recommendation is that you order café americano, American coffee. If you want something milky and comforting, then café con leche will be the ticket. But if you want a real experience, I recommend café de olla. This is what gives café de olla its name. It's an earthenware pot. You could use practically any pot to make café de olla. Well, anything except an aluminum pot. But if you get the opportunity, try to find an earthenware one. It adds flavor, actually. It's that mysterious kind of earthy flavor. Now, here's where café de olla gets really distinctive. First of all, it's sweetened with piloncillo. Remember piloncillo? And then it's spiced with cinnamon. This is the traditional Mexican cinnamon called canela. The flaky stuff, beautiful and flowery in its flavor, less strong than the cinnamon we know in the United States. And then anise seeds go into my favorite version of them, and boy does this give a beautiful flavor. Some people will add cloves, some people will add allspice or some little bits of orange peel to it. Spice it to suit your own taste, but those are the general traditional guidelines. Okay, now on to the making of the coffee. We've got about a quart of water boiling in our traditional olla. And now I'm going to put in, say 4 or 5 ounces of this chopped up piloncillo. You'd want to do this in your own kitchen with a heavy sharp knife. If you're cooking like I am on the beach, a machete against a hard rock will do the trick. So we'll drop that into the pot, sweeten it to suit your own taste. Just a few grains of anise. This is strong stuff, and of course, since I'm on the beach, I'm losing half of it to the wind. A couple inches of this beautiful cinnamon stick. Swirl it around to start dissolving that piloncillo in there. And when you're pretty confident that it's dissolved, then add ground coffee. I'm going to put about 2/3 of a cup of ground coffee into my 4 cups of water. And I think that'll just about do it. Now, take it off the fire, nestle it right down into the sand, or you might want to put a top on your pot at home, and we'll let it steep for 5 minutes. A steaming mug of Highlands coffee, the shade of palm fronds and the sound of a tropical ocean. Just another way to bring the elements of Mexico into one delicious brew. What about that chocolate pecan pie? Why, you didn't think I was gonna forget about the chocolate pecan pie now, did you?